This is business management, 418. Financial planning. My name is Bryan Sudweeks. I'm the instructor here. You can call me anything you want. I prefer Brother Sudweeks. You know, people who don't know me call me Dr. Sudweeks and Professor Sudweeks, but that's kind of the thing that I prefer. It's just so much easier when we're in church or in the temple and someone says, Dr. Sudweeks, you get embarrassed. Like, Brother Sudweeks is kind of an easier way to go. Let's talk just quickly about what we're going to do. This class really is about personal finance. And there's really two parts to personal finance. The personal is the hard part. The finance part is easy. It's math. And you know, so really, truthfully, if all you want is the math of this, it's all online. The book's online. PowerPoints are online. If all you want is the math, it's all there. But the challenge is it's the personal side that's hard. We know A plus B equals C. We know if we make $50 and we spend 60, we're at a deficit. The math is easy. It's the personal side that really is tough in personal finance. And so the question is, how do we encourage ourselves to make the decisions we need to make? How do we understand what's important for us to make? How do we understand what are the key decisions to make? And so that's the personal side. And so if you want help on the personal side, this is why you're here. Now I want you to know that I have 3 goals for this class, 3 personal goals for this class. Number 1, I want us to feel the Spirit. It's funny, we can spirit. If Joseph Smith could feel the Spirit while he was pulling sticks and working the temple as well, we can do it while we're standing down. Number 2, I want you to know that I care. I'm spending time trying to learn each of your names and where you're from. And so it's fun seeing faces now that I've been spending time with the pictures. And the third thing I want to do is I want to save you $1 million over your lifetime. And that's not a number I just picked out of the air. It's from Consumer Reports, 12 money mistakes that can cost you $1 million. So we will address each of these things here. So if I can save you $1 million over your lifetime, I think that will be a good deal. So those are kind of my personal objectives for the class. I think it's a good class. I have 7 children. They're all boys except for 6. And my 3 oldest daughters have taken this class, plus 2 sons-in-laws. Plus my wife has taken the class too. So that tells you how serious I think this is. So I think it's a good class. It's something we need to work on. So let's start. Why did you take this class? And what I like to do is I like us to divide into small groups of 3 or 4 people. And I don't like sizing those groups. So let's take a couple of minutes and talk about why you took this class. So turn your cell phones off. I only have mine on just so for the timer. So talk within your groups. I'm a grandpa, so I have 2 grandkids. I love to hear the noises. All right. What's up? What's your name? I know, it's fine. Don't ever think of being so figuring out how to structure the company, how to get it. I'm an IO. I just have to get it. I wonder how many. I don't really know these types of things. Apart from the controller. That's all I got.
My brother, he studied psychology, but it's okay. Totally tanked.
Why did you take this class? Let's come over here in this group over here. What were some of the reasons? Let everybody speak at once. Any questions? Yeah.
Okay. I had a friend who had taken this class, and he strongly recommended it. But I asked him if I should take it or not. He said, well, you know, it also kind of depends on how serious you are about doing it as a real plan for yourself. And since I do have a job selected already, and I know my salary and all these things, I can actually go through this class and apply it directly and make a real plan. So that's why I'm here.
And I would add too, the purpose of this class is not just to give you another credit. There's a lot easier credits and a lot less painful credits. But if you really want to change and to improve, most of you I assume are doing pretty well. If you want to improve a little bit, I think we can do a lot of good things. Other reasons why you took this class? Yes?
I had an internship in personal finance and loved it. Took Dr. Marsh's class and loved
Okay.
that. So it's what I love to learn about.
Okay. So someone said this class is Dr. Marsh's class on steroids. So it should be fun. Other reasons over here. Yun, why did you take this class? You're pretty smart. You've taken my classes before. You know better.
I haven't taken your test.
Okay.
Yeah, I have from my friend too, and now I'm about to get a job after graduation, and I need an actual personal finance.
We had another comment here. Okay. Anyone over here? Why take a class on personal finance? Yes.
I just think for 8 a.m. classes. Just suck at me. No, I'm lying. Just to maybe avoid mistakes that my parents have made, or just kind of have a leg up to just make the most out of every situation.
Avoid mistakes that other people have made. Other reasons. So other than it's a friend and to avoid mistakes, that's the only reason we're here at 8 o'clock class. Yes?
I think among all of the finance electives class, and this one is the most practical one.
Okay.
And I can come from China, you know, a lot of Asians, they save a lot of their income, but at the same time, I feel like it's more than saving the money, and also how do we invest it.
So it's practical. And is the goal to save you $1 million? Is that a good goal for a class? So I sent you an email that said you're going to spend $60. The packet's $25. The book for your personal financial plan is another $12, and your credit reports is $15 to $20. So if you can spend $60 and save $1 million, I do think that's a good return for a finance class. Okay. Other thoughts? Let me share a quote. Hopefully the projector will come up. What are the whys of personal finance? So we've talked about kind of why we're taking the class. Did you ever think about why we should understand about personal finance? I think that's an important question. And this is from President Uchtdorf, last year conference. I'd like you to read that. And the stuff in red is just, I put the stuff in red. And so this is his quote. And what he's doing is he's talking about we need to understand the whys of what we do. And in this case, he used the whys of priesthood service. Now what I want to do is I want to change it just a tiny bit. In every place there's red, I change to personal finance. What was that? When I read this quote and I started thinking on this, I thought this is powerful. Because if we can understand and what informs but the why transform. And so the question is, why does the Lord want us to study personal finance? What are the things that personal finance can teach us that can make a difference? Why don't you spend 3 minutes in your group and just talk about that? What are the whys of personal finance? Why? Why does the Lord want us to study this? Why do we have a class at a university on it? What difference will it make in our lives? Because if we can understand the whys, the why inspires us, the what informs, but the why transforms. Because we've got to have a reason why we're here. We've got to have a reason why we're doing here. And the reason is not just to make more money. There's got to be a deeper and a more all-encompassing reason why we're doing the things that we're doing. If we're going to allow the why to transform us to become better. Take 2 minutes.
You might have plans, buying a house, college, or getting experience themselves, or starting a business. If we don't take time to plan ahead and figure out exactly what we're have a very good idea of what it's going to
How often do you hear something, or not even finance, or you hear something you know is something good to do, eat salads and all that, you still just like you know what it does for you, it all depends on what you have.
I wasn't my wife was so I go to December. You're not that way. I would
What's the why behind personal finance? Why does the Lord give us this challenge? What are the lessons we can learn from personal finance? Yes?
I think being responsible with personal finance is a way of showing gratitude for what the Lord has given us.
So it's a way of showing gratitude for our Lord and Savior. Other reasons. Austin, what have you been thinking about?
I was actually talking to Austin here, his name's also Austin. A couple of days ago I was reading the parable of the talents, and so I kind of thought about that. The Lord, He's each given us certain gifts, certain situations in our life that He expects us to use what we have to grow it and to use it to in turn bless other people. So the more we do that, the more we're able to bless the family's lives and the lives of
So
other others.
another why is the more we understand personal finance, the more we can use it to bless our lives and the lives of our families. Yes.
No, I'm just reading two things already.
Oh, okay. Other reasons. What are the whys of personal finance? Yes.
Kind of going along with what he was saying, I think that's like stewardship.
Stewardship.
And recognizing all of the Lord has entrusted to us, that, you know, we're supposed to learn how to make the most of that, so that then he can later on entrust more to us and all that he has.
So have you found that, what does the Lord say? The one who was faithful over 5 cities, he gave more. So is there an element of stewardship there? Are we stewards over the things that we have? So one of the whys is to be better stewards. So you're taking this class so you can be better stewards over the things the Lord bless you. I like that. Other thoughts? Yes?
I guess going along with that, we learned in like another class where I did that. I mean, a lot of people say once you get a lot of money, I'm going to start giving more to charity and things like that, but it kind of really starts now. And Nate was saying, like in the Book of Mormon, like the pride cycle, obviously, so when people get more money, they get more lavish clothes and things like that. And it really kind of gets to their head and they don't know what to do with all that money and that wealth. But I think if you learn adequately what to do with your money and not have it, let it go to your head, then I think it's a powerful tool and you can actually use more of that money. To give
So
to
basically,
charity.
yeah, using the money and using it wisely. Other thoughts? Yes?
I think one of the areas that a lot of problems in our life comes from is from money. And so if you can have financial freedom, then it'll help you avoid a lot of problems. And like Elliot was saying too, like that common misconception, like, oh, after I start making X amount of money, then I'll have financial freedom. But then like if you look at for example, like some professional athletes are making millions of dollars, like 2 years after they retire when they're like 35 or whatever, and they're broke. And so you can have financial freedom when you're not making that much money.
So is financial freedom dependent on how much money you're making or how you use the resources you have? Yeah. Other thoughts? Why personal finance? What is the why that transforms our soul? The why that if we truly understood it, it would help us be a lot easier at making our decisions, right? Because the question is the perspective on personal finances that important? Other thoughts on the whys?
I just know that the brother who counsel us again to stay out of debt and not to debt.
So stay out of debt. So the brethren have counseled us. So does that mean that when we go in, so then staying out of debt is no longer a question of money? All of a sudden it's a question of faith. Because that's so we hopefully we're getting some interesting thoughts now about the whys. Let me just share a couple of things. And I'm not saying that these are the right answers, but let me share 4 reasons why, 4 of the whys that I think are important for personal finance. And because I think personal finance can teach us things that many other areas can't teach. Step back on that. What are things that personal finance can teach us that other areas perhaps can't do or perhaps can't do as well? We talked about some stewardship. We talked about giving. Other things that it can teach us. Yes?
Delayed gratification.
Delayed gratification. Giving up what you want now, giving up what you want now for something greater in the future. What do we call that? What do we call that in the church? Sacrifice. What do we call it in finance?
Investment.
An investment. Isn't it interesting? We interchange those two. So what are some of the other things personal finance can teach us? Yes? Discipline.
Kind of goes along with that. I think there's very few things that can help us learn willpower as much as finances.
I think priorities too, putting the Lord first. But let me just share just a couple of thoughts. I believe personal finance, one of the whys is to bring us to Christ. Whatever the challenge, the real issue is faith. And as we develop faith, it will bring us to it. You know, his work and his glory is to bring a pass our immortality and eternal life of man. And so I think that the first purpose, you know, as we learn to give, as we learn to share, as we learn to take the things of ours, it takes us out of that pride cycle. It takes us out of the desire that, you know, it's the race to see who can stand tallest when he stands on his wall, and those races there. So I believe that the lessons of personal finance, number one, bring us to Christ. Number two, I believe personal finance can help teach us the lessons we need to learn to accomplish our personal missions here on earth. I believe that everyone here has a personal mission. That there's something that only you can do. And I don't know what those things are. I'm still trying to figure out what mine is. But I believe we all have these personal missions. And our challenge here is to learn the things we need to learn so we can accomplish those missions. Number three, I believe the most important work we'll ever do is with our families. And I believe that as we do the things that personal finance can teach us, that it will help us return with our families to Heavenly Father's presence. You know, we'll be really sad if we make all this money and have all these things like this, and yet we have no family, and our families and our kids can't stand us or can't take care of us. And one of my favorite things is just hanging out with my kids. You know, I think I'm probably a better grandpa than I was dad, but I'm trying to make up for it. And then the last one, personal finance can help us become wiser stewards over our resources and blessings. You know, it's interesting, if you put personal finance in this context, does it take on a little bit higher importance? I think it does. If you think of personal finance, oh, I'm just trying to save money, or I'm just trying to get out of debt, or I'm just trying to save for a house, it's not as in depth. It's not as deep. It's more a kind of a superficial area. But if you realize that the purpose of personal finance, the whys of personal finance are to bring us to Christ, to help us to learn the things we need so we can accomplish our personal missions, to help us return with our families back to Heavenly Father's presence, and to help us to be wiser stewards over the blessings we have. All of a sudden, the perspective is different. And the perspective we take in this class is different. I have a good friend, his name is Scott Baird. Scott's a bishop in one of the student boards, but he and I worked as scoutmasters for like 8 years together. So we were a good pair. He's an all-nighter, and I go to bed early, so we'd go out with the Boy Scouts, and I'd go to bed about 10 or 11 o'clock, and he'd stay up with him until about 2 a.m., and then I'd wake him up at 6 a.m., and then we'd continue on. So he and I worked well together. But he told me a story when he was a missionary. He was a missionary back east, and I can't remember the name of the town. But they walked into this one house, and they knocked on the door, and it was a young guy. And they invited him in, and that was kind of a unique thing. They didn't get too many invites in on the day they were the tracking. But as he came in, he looked back on the door, and on the door were all these pictures. And the young man said, well, would you like to, let me tell you about that door? Scott said, sure. He says, well, do you see that top row of pictures? He says, that's the house I'm going to have in Sun Valley. That's the ski lodge I'm going to own there. Down there was another set of pictures. He says, that's the condo I'm going to have on Malibu Beach. And then underneath there was a set of 4 or 5 very expensive cars. And he says, like, those are the cars that I'm going to have. Very expensive. And underneath was a picture of a bunch of young women. He says, those were the supermodels. I'm going to marry the supermodel. And as you can tell from the discussion, he wasn't too interested in a discussion of the gospel. And so they left. The discussion didn't go too far. They left, and Scott didn't think much about it. Until about 20 years later, Scott's a professional speaker, does extremely well. Motivational speaker, and he was back doing a speech back east, someplace close by there. And he gave his speech. And Scott thought it was a good speech. Afterwards, this young, I guess it was a middle-aged man, came up to him. And he said, "Do you remember me?" And Scott just looked at him and kind of, you know how when you get old like me, you start scanning your memory banks in any possible way you can remember. And Scott looked at him for about 2 minutes solid and he says, "I'm sorry, I can't remember you." And he turned to him and he said, "Were you a missionary in this town?" He told him the name of the town. He said, "Yes, I was." He says, "Was that about 20 years ago?" And he says, "Yeah, it was." He says, "Do you remember knocking on the door of a young man who had a bunch of pictures on the back of his wall?" Scott, "Yeah, I do. You're that young man." He says, "Yeah, I'm a little older, but I am that man." And then he pulled out a thing of pictures. He said, "Do you remember that condo in Sun Valley?" He says, "Here's the one." He says, "You remember the lodge, remember the condo on Malibu Beach?" He said, "Here's the one I remember." "Remember I told you about those cars?" Another picture. It's a garage with a whole bunch of all these expensive cars. And he says, "I told you about my wife." He says, I'm getting a divorce from the supermodel and I'm getting married." And Scott is just getting small. Scott's just a normal guy like the rest of us. And all of a sudden, the guy paused. And he says, "And I've thought about taking my life many times." He said, "I wish I had what you had." And I think many times we don't realize the things that we have. My son is a missionary in Little Rock, Arkansas, and he works with a lot of very poor people. And he said, "Brian," he said, "Dad," he says, "the most important thing is just the gospel. These people have the gospel and they have everything. They have everything. And the question is, do we realize the things that we really have?" Can you imagine being woken up to that? One of my kids got one time in my life I used to like Mustangs. But I think there's different types of people. Some people do everything by the clock. And I hate to admit I'm that way. My wife and I get up at 5 and we run. We exercise. At 20 minutes to 7, we wake up our kids, and for 15 minutes we read scriptures. At 6:55 we have family prayer. And by 7 o'clock we've exercised, family prayer, family scripture study, and we're done. And after that, the day's work. But I mean, some people work by the clock. It's 8 o'clock I do these things, it's 9 o'clock I do these things like that. Other people, it's a compass. As long as I'm moving in the right direction, that's important. I may get off, but if I can kind of redo my compasses, my Boy Scout compass. But I think the truth is we need to have both. We need to have the tools that the compass brings. We need to have the time that the clock brings. And we need to do all of those things. So let's talk about what we're going to be doing in this class. I'm going to go into, well, probably the easiest thing on the syllabus, I just printed it off, and I got the document here, and so let's kind of talk about how we structure this class. Office hours, let's start first. My TA is Aaron McKell. I have office hours Mondays and Wednesdays from 2 to 4. Now, the downside is I'm what's called professional track, so I teach 5 classes with 5 preps. So I've got 220 students' names that I try to memorize. But I really do want you to come in and talk with me. So what I've done is between 2 and 3, you can actually go online and schedule my office hours. So if you go to BS office hours at gmail.com, I can BS legally because those are my initials. Passwords BYU, BYU, BYU. You can actually sign up for a time slot. You can do 10 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever you like. But I encourage you to do that. And that way I don't have to worry because there's 8 more people out there. And I like 2 to 3 because that makes it worthwhile. And then 3 to 4 is just walk in. My room number is 666, sign of the beast. So I'm in the large and spacious building to the east. My room number is 666, and my initials are BS. But so that's how I work. I encourage you to come by and just talk to me. Just come by and spend 5 minutes with me. I actually give people extra credit on participation if you'll do that. Just because I want to get to know you, and a little bit more than just your name and where you're from. I can tell you how many people are from Antioch, California. We got 2 people from Antioch, California. We've got an amazing number of Canadians in this class, things like that. So, catalog description, financial principles, the household decision making, integration between areas. What I found that there are 3 things. There's the whys, the whats, and the hows. There's the doctrines, the principles, and the applications. And too many people spend so much time on the hows and they don't spend much time on the doctrines, the whats, and the whys. And so what we do is with this class we'll do a principles-based approach. When we talk about budgeting, we'll talk about what are the key principles. We'll talk about investing, what are the key principles. We'll talk about retirement planning, what are the key principles. Because if we can get the principles right, you guys remember the quote, I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves. If we can understand the principles, then we will do so much better. And you can read, this is, going to learning center, you can actually read through this. My philosophy is that the more I get you guys to do, the better off you are. If you listen to me, you'll learn about 10%. If you listen and do some homeworks, it's 20%. But the more we get you to do, the better off we are. And so, in the learning pyramid, I try to get you doing as many activities as possible. Procedures. What we'll do over the time is we spend a lot of time lecture, discussions. I try to let you guys talk about 10 to 15 minutes within your groups every day. So you can share ideas and share application and things like that. Speakers. We will have 4 to 5 speakers come. I bring in Jason Payne, who is a fee-only financial planner. I bring in an insurance guy, Tyler Vongswad, to talk about insurance. I bring in a lawyer to help us all to write holographic wills toward the end of class. I bring in a portfolio manager, an investor, to talk about investing and kind of bring these things here too. So we try to bring in speakers to make it worthwhile. One of the most important things you'll ever do, and I think at BYU, will be to put together a personal financial plan. So everyone will put together one of these. And that's the key takeaway from this class. It's writing. What are the things you want to accomplish in life? You're writing down. It's living on a budget. It's building your financial statements. It's building a debt reduction plan if you're in debt, or setting goals when you're not. It's tax planning and cash management, credit cards. We'll pull your credit report and your credit score. It's insurance planning. It's investment planning. We'll teach you how do you build a portfolio? How do you select retirement? Or how do you select mutual funds? How do you monitor that portfolio? It's retirement planning. What strategies are you going to use for your accumulation stage, or your retirement stage, or your distribution stage? It's estate planning. It's wills. And so I joke, and I still joke, this is the class your mother wants you to take. and the fun thing is I've had many mothers come up to me, and their kids told them that, and they come up to me and say, you're right, this is the class that I wanted my child to take. And so if you can think of all those things that your mother wants you to learn, that's what we're going to be teaching in this class. In addition to putting that personal financial plan together, you will do service teaching. We will have you teach 4 hours, individual hours. It can be any subject related to personal finance. Just as I come through, I have a lesson plan, I have my PowerPoints, I have a summary. You'll actually write up a sheet on it. Show me what your lesson plan was, you'll teach it, and then you'll tell me the results of that lesson plan. In addition, some people, so you have to do that for 4 hours. If you're married, I encourage you to teach your spouse. If you're married and your spouse wants to come and join you in this class, that's okay as well. But we have a couple other things you can do. There's a group called MoneyWise Financial Seminars where we actually go and teach to young married stakes. And we'll be doing one in February for the Marriott School for Investment Banking Club. And you would actually come and you would be a mentor for that. So you can do that. There's also another thing called the International Family Initiative, where they're putting together 400 to 600 word documents that are on the internet about personal finance. The goal is to put together the largest worldwide library of resources strengthening the family. And so they'll be here on Thursday to share that. You guys can also contribute to that. So there's a number of things where we can go outside the university to help teach. And one of the reasons we're recording is for me to do the same thing that you're doing, which is to help us teach. So service teaching, how do I grade? Hopefully this class is more important than the break. And the reason I say that is because people who understand personal finance, they tend to gravitate toward this, the importance of it. And so I get a lot higher students with higher GPAs, and I hate to admit that I have to grade on a curve, but I do. So one of the things we do is attendance. This is not the class you want to miss. If you're not here, we can't learn from you, and you can't learn from your fellow students here. So I grade attendance highly. I give you 5 points of attendance. You miss one unexcused. If that 5 points just went to 4 points. You missed 3 days unexcused, that 5 points just went to 2. That's which is basically great. Participation and preparation. I find that I like it a lot better when everybody's read the material, so I have a common base from which to talk with. So you can either read the chapters or you can read through the PowerPoints. Either of those are fine, but I'd like you to do that before class. And what we'll do is we'll send around a bowling report. If you're here and you're there, you can put an X. So this is the only class where you get straight strikes for 28 days. Good news is today everybody gets an X. If you're here but you haven't read, it's just a slash. If you miss a day, then you can come back and read over, you can put an M over there. And what I do is an X is 5, a slash is 3, and M is 2. Or if you have a slash with an M, it's 4. And then I just add those up and do that as a percentage. So it's pretty easy if you're here and you're prepared. The points are there. We've got 7 quizzes in this class. Every 4th day we have a quiz. You'll take the quiz before class. Now, let me give you a hint. I encourage you to do well on the quizzes, because if you do really well on the quizzes, I give you an option that you can take the average of your quiz score minus some percent to be for your final exam. And since the most important take-home of this class is your personal financial plan, students tend to like that. In addition, on the quizzes, I have one formula sheet that I allow you to use. The quizzes are closed notes, closed books, closed everything except a formula sheet. And so I have one formula sheet that you can use for all the quizzes. You can also use that formula sheet in the final exam. So that's got some stuff on ratios and taxes, different things like that. And finally, the final exam is just like a whole bunch of quizzes together. So here's kind of our grading schedule. Attendance 5%, participation and preparation 10, service teaching 5, the quizzes are 40%, final exam 15, and personal financial plan is 25%. Now, let's talk a little bit about that personal financial plan. I want to encourage people to get it done beforehand. So what I've done is I put together a framework. If something's due on Thursday, you can actually come and talk to me on Wednesday. And I'll actually pre-grade it. So we'll pre-grade anything that's not due. And if we pre-grade it and we find you're missing something, we'll tell you what you're missing. And so you can actually go back and fix that. But that's only if it's due, that's only for things that are, before the due date. So what I want you to do is come out of this class with a good financial plan. Now, if it's after the due date, we grade it and you lost points, you can actually get half of those points back by going and redoing and making those changes. So what that does is that tends to push up the grades on the personal financial plans. But that is really the key takeaway from this class. If you can come out of this class with a personal financial plan that you really believe and you're really willing to follow, it can make a major difference. Notice we have templates for each of your sections. There's actually a grading key on there as well, so you can actually pre-grade your stuff as well, so you can kind of see. But it's a very detailed, and it's an important tool. It's interesting, Jason comes in, he talks about the financial plan, and he says, we do about 95% of what you do, and we charge about $3,000. So what you're putting together, if you had to take it out to a traditional financial plan, it would probably cost you in somewhere, Jason's reasonable, somewhere in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. So we want to do it. And then finally, what do you want to do well in this class? Number one, understand the objectives. This is a very structured class. Every day you will see our PowerPoints, and here's our objectives for the class. In the presentations, I will choose which of those objectives I want to emphasize, but I will emphasize those with my presentations. At the end of the day, there is a summary sheet that reviews each of the key points from what we do. So those PowerPoints they're hyperlinked, the reviews are hyperlinked, all of the stuff, so you can access it very easily. At first I didn't like Learning Suite because it was painful and things like that. As it gets better, I'm liking it more and more. Okay, questions on kind of the syllabus and kind of where we are? Oh, one more thing. What you have to purchase is you purchase a packet. The packet's $25. It's 2 CDs. The first CD is the book we use in class. It's a book I wrote. I'm sorry, I apologize. I at least took it from 700 to 600 pages this last year, so be thankful for that. Yeah, the other good thing is I don't charge you for it, so the book here is free. Notice my CD that you have, you can make as many copies and share as many people. It's my stuff. So you have permission to make copies and share it. It's also up on the website at personalfinance.byu.edu. So if you're ever away, if you're ever away, you can just download it. The other thing is the PDF version. You can bring it on your iPhones and open in iBooks, and that you've actually got the books on your smartphones and things like that, which is kind of a nice thing here. You also have 2012 Quicken 2012 Deluxe. I used to tell students, any teacher who teaches personal finance and has you buy a $250 book that you use for 3 months and sell back for $50 should fail the course. Don't you agree?
Yes.
And so what I do is I have you buy a packet for $25. If you don't like the class, you sell Quicken to your roommate for $50 and you make $25 on it. Okay, so I try to practice what I preach. So encourage you to look through there. So read through the syllabus. It's testable material. Some of that will be on the first quiz. Okay, questions on the syllabus? Let me tell you a story. I have a brother, Phil, who lives in Sandy. He's an insurance guy. I actually tried to get him to come and speak, but he doesn't like to speak in front of groups. It's a little bit different from me, but he's a really good guy. And it was a Saturday morning, and it was the Saturday morning of a BYU football game. And he said, called me up and he said, Brian, I need a hand. He says, I took the roof off. I had leaks in my roof, and so I took all my shingles off, and I'm trying to put them back on. And there's a storm coming tonight. Would you come and give me a hand? And you have to understand, first of all, me you'll understand, but my wife is a die-hard BYU football fan. You know it. Rain, snow, ice, she doesn't care. She's there. And I love BYU football as well, and so it was a really tough decision. You know, one of those decisions that kind of tugs the heartstrings. But I talked to my wife, and she said, "You should come. I mean, we paid for these tickets." And then she realized that I was leaning into going to help, and so she said, "You know what? I'll tell you what. I'll just take some of my friends. I'll have more fun without you." But my brothers and I, we all did construction growing up. So I grew up in a little town called Brentwood, California, right next to where Austin lives. And so I'm a finished carpenter. When I'm done, it's finished regardless of what it looks like. But I got my nail apron, and I went up there, and we worked. And we started about, he had tried to get people from his elders quorum, and most of the people were just really busy. So he had one guy there, and so he and I, we started about 11. And about 8:45, it was just, you barely could see. And the neat thing is we put lights up there and we continued to work until we at least had the roof on. And the other place we put visqueen on it just to protect some of the other areas. But it was fun. It was fun to work with my brother Phil. And I think BYU won the football game. My wife had a better time without me there, but it was important for me to be there, for me to help. Let me step back. Story number 2, when I was a kid growing up, And I'll tie all these things together. When I was a kid growing up, my dad was a pilot during World War II. He was in charge of one of the Thunderbird fields in Arizona. And I had a sister and a brother who were back here at BYU, and so in 1963, my dad bought a Comanche 180, a Piper Comanche 180, which was one of the first of the retractable gear airplanes. And we used to, we would leave Antioch Airport at about 7 o'clock in the morning. And my dad would the Comanche 180 is a little 4-seater aircraft, one of the first retractable gears. I think my dad paid $10,000 for it in 1960. So back then airplanes were cheap. But as a kid, 4-seater plane, and my parents would put the 3 youngest kids in the back. So you'd back there with my brothers fighting, things like this. But one of the things I remember is my dad would take us, to get over the Sierra Nevadas, he would take us up to about 11,000 feet. And then he would stick that plane on autopilot. And I remember as a kid sitting back there, there's 3 of us in the 2-seater things, and I'd look in between there, and my dad was on the left and my mom was on the right, and they were just talking. They were just talking, having a great time. And my dad, he'd put in an autopilot, and then they would just talk for hours. And I'd be sitting there, and I remember watching the yoke there, the aileron just go back and forth. And what my dad is, he'd put that on. The autopilot worked on Omni stations, is that what it is? And so it would triangulate on different things, and that plane would just move toward its goal. And then probably about 3.5 hours later, my dad would bring us into Salt Lake and we'd turn south, come to Provo, and my dad would come to Provo. We'd kind of fly over where my brother's house was. That was the indication that he had to come out and pick us up and then pick us up at the airport. But it was an interesting thing to see there. And once my dad would put that on autopilot, to see how the plane would just continue to go. The plane would just continue, and you'd hit. This was a small plane, you'd feel something hit you, wind and things like this, and then it would be interesting to sputter a little bit, and then it would just come back straight again. And I've often wondered if we can put our lives on autopilot. Can we put our financial lives on autopilot? That we can set the goals, that we can work on those. So every day we don't have to think about, are we turning to the left or are we turning to the right? Can we think about how would we do that in our lives? I know this is the finance class, but I'd like you to tell me who the author is and the title. So I'm trying to bring some culture into this class a little bit. I'm not very good at this. It says, 2 roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And me one traveler long I stood, and looked down as one as far as I could to where it bent me in the room. Then took the other just as fair, having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. And though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay. In leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. Author? What's the title? Whose woods are these? I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here, or watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there's some mistake. The only other sounds the sweet and easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep. And miles to go before I sleep. Author? Title? What are these 2 poems? How do these 2 poems relate to personal finance? How do they relate to the things that we've been talking about? First of all, let's go back to the story of the roof. How does that relate? Are there storms coming? Yeah. Storms are coming. Many people will say that the storms are already here. Do we have brothers that are out there who need help? Yes. And is it inconvenient? Are we going to miss BYU football games and BYU basketball games to go and help? Yes. But it's critical. Let's talk about the poems. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. How does that relate to the things that were going on? Yes?
Well, it seems planning financially being frugal to spend is the road less traveled.
I have people tease me because my house is paid off. I'm a finance professor, I know. I can earn 8% there and I'm only paying 3.5% of my mortgage. You've got your house paid off. How stupid is that? What? You're buying the car on cash. You're not using pet payments. I'm only paying 2.9%. You ever get these type of comments? Are we taking the road less traveled? What? You're out of debt? What? You know, go enjoy yourself. You should be spending lots of money. But you know, the decisions that we make now are the decisions that can impact you for the rest of your life. When I was your age, I made decisions on how much, a question on donating, how much I was going to donate. I made decisions on how I was going to live my life, how I was going to spend it. But I haven't changed since then. Two roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled, and that has made all the difference. How about this one? But I have promises to keep. What promises have we made? To family, to friends, perhaps to future unborn children, grandson, to Heavenly Father. Schedules here. And again, everything's hyperlinked here. So the PowerPoints that we did today are here. Notice our desk, our class summaries there as well. So we can kind of go over the things that I felt were important to talk about. One of the things I'd like you to do is I need you to go online and print off this. That's the wrong one. Did I do the right? But I'll have that individual education plan for this class. Sorry about that. But you can download that, fill it out, and really, what are the things you want to accomplish from this class? What's your major? What are the things you'd like? Any subjects you would like me to address here that we kind of bring on? And so it helps me to understand who you are and why we're here. Again, so notice here's day one. Notice here's our objectives. Here's our class summary for each of these days. What are the requirements? And notice, too, with this personal financial plan, does it seem like a pretty big document? Who's got that plan right now? Is it pretty thick? Yeah, it is. So if you kind of save everything for the last day, you're going to have some challenges. And so what we do is we have intermediate goals. We'll talk about something a week later. You'll need to apply it in your life and then hand it in. We'll talk about it maybe a couple of weeks later too. So realize there's intermediate goals that we have. And so like here, day 5, you need to hand in the binder, tabs, and table of contents. You'll take quiz 1 before class. So realize that these are these assignments here. So questions on the syllabus? Yes?
About the learning tools, I went through those yesterday, and I'm not quite sure what we should do with that.
All you do is just kind of understand it. Just right. And then what we'll do is we'll use these tools as we go in. So the learning tools, what they are is either templates or tools such as how do you build an investment plan, or we'll talk about how do you donate appreciated securities to pay your taxes. We'll talk about a number of things. And so these are tools and things that we use, things like a risk tolerance test or an investment process worksheet or spreadsheets like this to help you. as you work on personal finance. And most of these things are not mine, they're ideas that students came up with, and they said I could use them, so we do that. So, questions on Learning Suite? So I want you to read, for example, for Thursday, which is day 2, I need you to read chapter 2. You can either read chapter 2 or you can kind of go through the PowerPoints. If you're visually, some people are more visual than linear. If you're linear, read the book. If you're visual, you can kind of go through the PowerPoints. PowerPoints are faster. I tend to be a little bit verbose in some of the things I write. And that way when you come to class, you can put an X, not only you're here, but you've read as well. These things, just hit them really quickly. Here's just some examples of personal financial plans, some online examples.
So, quick question.
Yes?
So you're saying we have that option, we can do the
Right.
PowerPoints. I mean, is there any disadvantage as far as when the quizzes and like, will there ever be?
Well, what I would do is just make sure you understand at the end of these PowerPoint. So here's how we did the book. I started using a book here in this class, and no one covered the things that I felt were important. Books would have one piece or another piece. And so I went to PowerPoints, then I had 12,000 PowerPoints. And the students thought that was great. So then I took the PowerPoints and used the PowerPoints, and from the PowerPoints wrote the book. So if there's similarities between the PowerPoints and the books, then you'll know why. But the nice thing about writing your own book is every year I update it. So you've got the most updated tax numbers, estate planning numbers, investment numbers, all of these things there too. And so my goal with my TAs is every year we're trying to shorten, kind of be more precise. Realize too, there's a website, the personal finance website, all of this stuff is on the website as well. Questions on the syllabus and kind of the framework? Okay. So, how important is perspective? Any thoughts? How important is perspective? Well, someone will define perspective for me. What's perspective? Yes?
Shouldn't be dark. I feel like perspective is how somebody sees something.
It's how we see things. Can perspective be different depending on where you stand? Is there a correct perspective?
In most cases, no. It's just based on what people think.
I like this. What Will Durant said. He says, we want to know that the little things are little and the big things are big before it's too late. We want to see things now as they will seem forever in light of eternity. I believe there is a correct perspective. As they are, as they were, as they are to come. And so the question is, what is our perspective in this class? And our perspective is simple. And that's personal finance is simply living the gospel with Jesus Christ. It's simply part of our Christian lives. It's not separate. It's not different. Personal finance is simply being good Christians. It's putting Christ first in our lives. But I believe if we don't put Christ first in our lives, in the end, is it going to matter what we put first? That's not, because what was lost is the most important thing. And perspective is, personal finance is simply living the gospel. Part of good Christian living. That perspective is based on a couple of principles, and then there's some important implications of that. Let me share a quote. Richard Scott said this: I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves. He uses that pattern with us. So your faithful compliance to correct principles will generate criticism and ridicule from others. Yet the results are so eternally worthwhile that they warrant your every sacrifice. So what are the principles on which our perspective is based? And we actually address some of those in the whys. What are the principles that are so eternally worthwhile that they warrant your every sacrifice? Yes?
I think it is provident living.
Provident living. Other thoughts? Yes.
Like you said, like eternal families, you want to
Eternal families.
help your family, eternal.
And ideally, if we follow these principles, it should help us to make every financial decision in life correctly. Or make better financial decisions. Other thoughts as to those principles? Yeah.
I think one of the most important is consecration.
Consecration. Tell us a little bit about consecration. What is consecration?
To me, consecration is giving of my time and my talents and resources to build up others and specifically to build up the community.
So giving of our times and resources and talents to build others and build the community. Okay. Other ones, other principles. And I call these my principles of finance. Other thoughts? Realize just because I've got them on the PowerPoint doesn't make it right. But at least it'll give you something to think about. Let me share a couple of principles. 4 principles that I think are important. And I think principle number 1 is ownership. I believe nothing we have is our own. The scriptures talk, the earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. Is they that dwell therein, does that include us? The answer is yes. We know the Lord's the creator of the earth, supplier of our breath, giver of our knowledge, the provider of life. How long could we last without the Lord? How long? You want to find out? Hold your breath. Because we couldn't even have a breath without the Lord. So does that make things a little bit different if the things that we have are not ours? Think about the cycle of destruction in the Book of Mormon. What are the factors that led? What led to pride? Prosperity. Is it ownership? Can you have pride in your buddy's car? Or your neighbor's house? Take away ownership and what do we eliminate? We eliminate pride. So ownership, so if we're not owners, then what are we? If we're not owners over the things that we had, what are we? Back to your idea on consecration. So what are we? We're stewards. And the question is, stewardship, is that a temporal commandment, or is that an eternal, or is that just temporal? Every man accountable as a steward over earthly blessings. Diligent in preserving what thou art. For it is the free gift of the Lord thy God, and thou art his. However, what's necessary for us to be able to exercise stewardship? What do we have to have? What's necessary for us to be able to exercise stewardship? What do we have to have? Agency. And I like this quote here. Next to the bestowal of life itself, the right to direct that life is God's greatest gift to man. Freedom of choice is more to be treasured than any possession. So principles, ownership, stewardship, agency, and what's the last one? We stole it from the Young Women's Program. Come on, young women. Choice and accountability. Okay. So we're accountable for every choice we make. And I believe the scriptures talk about we'll be held accountable for our thoughts and our actions, our actions and our words. But you want an even scarier thought? I believe we'll be held accountable for every dollar that goes through our hands. Did we use it in the best way possible? Do you think if you truly understood ownership and stewardship, agency and accountability, would it be hard to contribute, to pay your tithes and offerings? Would it be hard to send your kids on missions? I've got 2 kids on missions right now. We're just sending off my niece. She's been living with us for the last 3 or 4 months. Would it be hard to make those contributions there? Would it be hard, to help your kids if you decided to help them with missions and education? I think if you truly understood these things, these principles here, that perspective is very easy. I used to think, when the scriptures say the Lord wanted a broken heart and a contrite spirit, I thought that was an easy thing. I thought, you just had to be humble and teachable. And it wasn't until I read this quote by Elder Brother Maxwell that I really understood what he said. Why don't you spend a minute to read this? The submission of one's will is really the only uniquely personal thing we have to place on God's altar. The other things we give, brothers and sisters, are actually the things He has already given to us. However, when you and I finally submit ourselves by letting our individual wills be swallowed up in God's will, then we are really giving something to Him. It is the only possession which is truly ours to give. When the Lord says He wants a broken heart and a contrite spirit, He's not asking for an easy thing. He's asking for everything. So our perspective is simple. Personal finance is simply part of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We know the whys of personal finance, which is to bring us to Christ, to help us learn the things, so we can accomplish our missions when we're sent here on earth, to help us to return with our families to Heavenly Father's presence, and to help us to be wise stewards over the blessings. We also know the principles on which it's based: ownership, stewardship, agency, and accountability. But it's really interesting, there are some wonderful implications of that perspective. Powerful implications of that perspective. That I think, if you get a chance, I'd encourage you to look at the PowerPoints. The PowerPoints and the book are different. So I'd encourage you to use the PowerPoint. But let's just talk about what are some of the implications of that difference. Or implications of that perspective. So before it used to be personal finance was all about money. What do we know it is now? Is personal finance about money? No, we've been commanded to get out of debt and live within our means. Save for retirement, save for our long-term goals. So is personal finance now about money? Is it a question of money now? No. It's a question of faith. Let me just give you a couple of other ones. Spencer W. Kimball said every family should have a budget. Why we would not think of going without a budget one day in this church? We have to know what we have coming in, and surely must know what we're going to spend. And one of the reasons for the success of this church is we do not spend that which we do not have. So Spencer W. Kimball, if our leaders have said we should go on a budget, so is the question of living on a budget, is that a question of finance? Or is it a question of obedience? I was at a conference last year in Charleston, and I talked about this personal finance class. And I was one of the few faith-based institutions to present. And one of the gentlemen in the back said, Mr. Sudweeks, he says, how do you get your students to do the things that you talk about? He says, I have a challenge motivating my students. And I said, I thought for a minute, and then I said, when I teach them what the prophets and the apostles have said. And that takes the decision from being one of money to being one of faith. He thought for a minute, and then he smiled and he says, oh yes, you have a bigger hammer. And I thought it was kind of a receptive comment, because we do have a bigger hammer. Let me just share a couple of this. We're winding down. Here's just some of those perspectives that are implications of that perspective. It's not life about us, life is about others. It's about faith. Finances are a spiritual matter. The Lord wants us to be free. Money is a tool to bring us to Christ. We're responsible for our finances. Debt is an addiction. Every family should have a budget. We cannot judge or compare. We must learn to be financially honest. So let me just kind of summarize the things that we've talked about today. This is going to be a busy class. There's more work than a traditional 400 level class. But the purpose we're here is not just to get 3 credits. The purpose we're here is hopefully to be just a little bit better stewards over the things that we've blessed us with. You understand the structure, you understand how we work in this class, but we're going to be taking pieces of this financial plan every day. So starting on Thursday, we're going to start talking about goals, and then we're going to start talking about budgets, and we're going to talk pieces every day, and then we're going to work on those. We talked today about what our perspective is. Our perspective is personal finance is just part of Christian living. It's part of just helping us to be more like our Savior. We talked about the whys, to bring us to Christ, to help us accomplish our missions, to help us to return with our families, to help us be wise stewards. We talked the basis on which that perspective is based, which is ownership, stewardship, agency, and accountability. And then we ended up with what are the implications of that perspective. And the implications are serious, and they will make a difference. Today we did a number of stories. We talked about Scott. You know what? The thing is, I don't think we realize or how grateful for the blessings that we have, for the things that we know. As my son said on his mission, he's talking to people, they have the most important things. They have everything. Do we really need the expensive cars and the expensive camp houses that we have? We talked about the rough brothers and sisters. We've got our brothers who are out there who need help. The storms are coming, and the storms are going to be serious. And we're in storms now. They need people who are knowledgeable and informed who can help out. This class will help. We talked about Robert Frost poems. Robert Frost poems. You know, we've got promises. Promises to keep. We made promises before we came to the new life, before we were born. And we have those to keep. And we will have to take a road less traveled. You know, we may not have that biggest cars and the biggest houses and things like that. But if it eventually leads us back to our Father in heaven, that's the important. My final comment is that little airplane. Remember sitting in the back and looking there, with that yoke going back and forth. If we can put our lives, if we can set our goals, if we can set our frameworks, so we know what we're trying to accomplish. So we've got our goals that each day I'm going to do these things. Just like my dad could put that airplane on autopilot, to a degree we can put our lives on autopilot. So when you guys get to be old and decrepit like me, you know, you'll be able to accomplish things because you have saved, you have lived frugally, and you've lived in such a way so you can accomplish all the goals that your Father in heaven has have you. Questions? Thanks, everyone. We'll see you on Thursday.